with China because China, from our perspective, supports Russia. So if China supports the aggressor, and Russia is the biggest threat, how to cooperate with China. But from my understanding, it's because it's aggression, it's a violation. UN Charter is a black and white situation that you could not be between. You should condemn Russia or support. You could not be in between because it's a black and white situation. So
now,
this
in the same way, I was ambassador UN then. The United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 was not endorsed by the UN Security Council, was not an act of self-defense, and so Kofi Annan called it an illegal war. Now, let me ask you a simple question, a painful question. That was an illegal war. Did the European Union apply sanctions on the United States?
You said that for Asian countries, China is a predictable partner. So what about some kind of, let's say, China's, activities in the South China Sea, for example, the militarization, the land reclamation? What about the, let's say, China's activities around Taiwan? China's coercions against Lithuania is a kind of a new mode of coercion because China has decided to weaponize the supply chains. So
he said, this I'm quoting the Indian foreign minister, he said, the problem with Europe is that Europeans think that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. Right? So I think you should show some sensitivity, because Europe at the end of the day makes up less than 5% of the world's population. There are 95% out there. The remaining 95% have their own concerns and interests, which are very real also.
大家好，今天我们来看一场堪称降维打击的思想交锋。这场对话发生在2023年9月，一方是新加坡的资深外交家马凯硕，另一方是一位来自波兰的学者。这场对话非常有意思。欧洲现在为什么这么双标？为什么这么愚蠢？为什么总是对中国充满偏见？凡事都跟在美国屁股后面。这场对话就像一个缩影，完美的回答了这个问题。在接下来的内容里，你会看到这位欧洲学者是如何抱着他那套非黑即白的道德优越感，反复挑中国的毛病。为什么你们不谴责俄罗斯？为什么你们要跟支持侵略者的中国搞好关系？而马凯硕则用他那清晰的逻辑、渊博的学识和无可辩驳的事实，不慌不忙的把欧洲这种虚伪的道德高地拆得干干净净。这可以说是一场教科书式的辩论。接下来我们就来看看马凯硕是如何给他的欧洲同行上一课的。
To be honest, I have several questions, but to be honest, I'm not completely agree with you in a sense that
I would be very surprised if you agree.
Yeah, okay. So let me ask you several questions referring to what you have said. First of all, you said that, of course, the Asian countries are focusing on the economic and social development, and economic situation will be better. The Asia would be number one. The world is preparing for Asia century. So my question is about this situation in China. Because, and also reading your book, I think that there is a kind of a change in China that I agree with you. You wrote this book a few years ago, that there is a kind of a social contract in China that a party or Xi Jinping government provides society the economic development, and there is a kind of a deal, and they could have this political system. People are pretty happy, and so on and so forth. But I have an impression that right now is a kind of a change of this contract, that this focus is on, in China, not on economy and economic development and social well-being, but mostly on the security issues. You know, I'm talking about this zero-COVID policy, especially in the second hard lockdown, the economic problems that China is facing right now. The good example is this real estate crisis. Also, the fact that party decided to not to publish the data of youth unemployment. So this is the question: how the impact of China's economic situation may have on on China and on Asia, also in this rivalry between the United States and China. And also, as you said, that there is a kind of a dilemma in Europe when it comes to looking at this China-US rivalry. I think to be honest, there is a kind of a consensus that we should cooperate with the United States, and that China is to some extent a challenge or even a threat. Of course, we do not to decouple. There is right now the de-risking slogan that we would like to, what we would like to have is to focus on strategic dependencies when it comes to our security issues. So I think in that sense there is no dilemma. And the last point, and also I would like to ask you, because of course for us right now the most important thing here in Europe is the war in Ukraine because of Russia's invasion. So how to deal with China, and also how to communicate with the Asian countries, with China, because China, from our perspective, supports Russia. So if China supports the aggressor, and Russia is the biggest threat, how to cooperate with China and how to cooperate with the countries that do not have a very clear view when it comes to this invasion. I know that it's not a major topic in Asian countries, in ASEAN countries, but from my understanding, it's because it's aggression, it's a violation. UN Charter is a black and white situation that you could not be between. You should condemn Russia or support. You could not be in between, because it's a black and white situation. So this is my question to you after your remarks.
Thank you, thank you. And as I said, I'd be very surprised if you agree with me. We look at the world very differently from the other. But there are three big questions you're asking me. Number one, is the China growth story over? Number two, what are Europe's strategic interests? And number three, how do we factor in the Ukraine war? These are the three big questions. Now, the first question is the China growth story over? I always, whenever I speak to any audience, issue a commercial warning that never trust the Anglo-Saxon media on China. Because if you use the Anglo-Saxon media to understand China, you will get a very distorted perspective. And if you're interested, I can email you 20 years of headlines from major Western newspapers, including The Economist, saying, is China about to collapse? Is China about to collapse? China's story is over. It's 20 years, consistently. So this is what is happening now.
But I'm not talking about the collapse. I'm not. I don't want to be so extreme about collapse. But the economic problems that China is facing. Let's say.
Yes. But you see, you're only hearing one side of the story. Do you know that last year, China overtook Japan to become the world's #1 automobile exporter? How come a country that is struggling becomes the world's #1 economics exporter? Did you hear that in the scientific journals, in Tier 1, peer-reviewed scientific journals, which country is now producing the largest number of peer-reviewed scientific papers in the world? Used to be United States, today is China. So what we Asians notice, China has got massive problems. But China has always had massive problems. China is the largest country in the world. The largest country in the world has the largest problems in the world. So yes, there are problems with the way they manage COVID. I think they handle COVID, the exit from COVID, very badly. They make mistakes. I mean, no country is perfect. Every country makes mistakes. China has made lots of mistakes too. The question is, can China learn from its mistakes and overcome it? And I can tell you that the Asian countries have decided that the China growth story is continuing. And they're going to be part of it. And they're going to integrate with China. So all the problems you mentioned, right? For example, the real estate crisis, they will solve it. It may take a few years, but they'll solve it. And don't forget, China still has the world's largest foreign reserves, $3 trillion, which they can do a lot with. They have all kinds of resources. And the Chinese have developed a very pragmatic way of managing these issues that they do. So this year is a bad year for China, 2023. Maybe they'll have 1 or 2 bad years. They'll come out of it. And remember, they only have to grow at they've been growing at 8-9%, right? For the last 30 years. They only have to go to 4 to 5%, and then they can overtake the United States. So it's a question of the overall perspective. And anyway, I can assure you, if I come back here in 5 years' time, you will find that my predictions are right and the Anglo-Saxon media is wrong. I can confidently predict that. See? Now, the second point about Europe's strategic interests. Now, one point I always emphasize is that geopolitics is a very cruel business. If you try to inject moral values into geopolitics, you always get into trouble. Because it's all at the end of the day about interests that drive countries. Now, you mentioned this. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is illegal. That's absolutely clear. I was ambassador to the UN for 10 years, and I know what makes a war legal and what makes a war illegal. A war is legal only if it's endorsed by UN Security Council or if it's an act of self-defense. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is not endorsed by UN Security Council and also not an act of self-defense. Now, in the same way, I was ambassador to UN then. The United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 was not endorsed by the UN Security Council, was not an act of self-defense, and so Kofi Annan called it an illegal war. Now, let me ask you a simple question, a painful question. That was an illegal war. Did the European Union apply sanctions on the United States? So, and the rest of the world understood. You have your interests, perfectly natural. Your interests were very clear, right? So that's how countries make decisions. Now, if you read my book, I point out that what the European Union needs to be concerned about is its own long-term strategic challenges. And the biggest strategic challenge for Europe over the next 10, 20 years is going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa. Now, in the year 1950, Africa's population was half that of Europe's. Today, Africa's population is 2.5 times the size of Europe. By 2100, Africa's population will be 10 times the size of Europe. So your main strategic priority is to focus on the development of Africa, because otherwise, if you don't, the migrants that will come will create far stronger far-right parties in all over European Union. And then you will have a very different situation. But that, at the end of the day, it's your decision. It's your decision, not ours. But we in Asia, you notice, we don't have migrants, right? Because we create opportunities for jobs for people where they live, right? Indonesia, with a population of 260 million, is much poorer than its neighbor Australia. Australia's got 25 million. No migrants from Indonesia to Australia. Why? Indonesia creates hope for its people. Indonesia is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. So we are focused on creating stability for ourselves for the next 10 to 20 years. And I would encourage Europe to also focus on your own interests. Where are your interests? And focus on them, because that's your decision. And whatever decision you make is your right decision. Now, third question on Ukraine, one quick point. Just a very simple question. What is the difference between the Chinese position on Ukraine and India's position on Ukraine?
The same.
Huh?
The same.
They're exactly the same.
So to be frank, let me offer my personal perception.
Yeah.
I think that India is becoming like China. And I agree with you that India's position and China's position is the same, but it does not solve the problem. It's an additional problem that India, as a democratic country, has the same position on Russia's invasion. So this is the huge question for me also, how to deal with India, not only with China.
But let me add, I predict over the next 10 years, the United States will court India ferociously. I predict that, despite its position in Ukraine.
Well,
the reason I say this, geopolitics is a very cruel game, very cruel game. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. I wish that my predictions that I made 30 years ago didn't come true. Unfortunately, they keep coming true.
Professor, can I refer to your response to my questions about this China's situation, economic situation, and you said that we have access only to the Anglo-Saxon stories. To be frank, it's very difficult to have access to the Chinese information, you know. As a China expert, for years, I have an access to this database of China's articles in Chinese. I remember that I went to China and I have to buy a kind of a card with some kind of code, and I could download the articles. Right now, it's impossible. A few years ago, it was very expensive. Right now, it's impossible. So, you know, it is also the problem with us that China is, in that sense, is not open country that I could not even download without asking my friends in China if they could help me. You know, so this is the problem of the access to the information. That is very difficult to have access to the information from China. And also talking to Chinese experts right now, they are also using, in my understanding, official talking points. You know, it's difficult to have the conversation which could be a little bit, let's say, critical about situation in China, some critical about the government. So this is also the question that maybe you're right, maybe it's a better situation in China that we think that we have problems to have an access to the information. So this is one issue. The second one about this situation and this Russia's invasion, and you said about Iraq and the United States. Well, I have an impression that it is that what you have said is whataboutism. Okay, I agree. We may criticize, but we are in a 20 years later, and Asian countries using the same, and China is using the same argument. What about war in Iraq? What about situation in Afghanistan? So let's go a step further and say, okay, there was a mistake. It was a mistake. We shouldn't do that. So maybe why we should also say, but what about? It's like a whataboutism. Don't you think that we should be pretty clear that is okay, it's an invasion, and so this is my question. And to be frank about our interest in cooperation with Africa, and so in your book you wrote that we should cooperate together with China when it comes to Africa. Well, generally speaking, yes, I know that we should, as a Europe, cooperate with Africa, and it's not a question. But right now, the biggest problem for us is the war that we have behind our border, the classical war with Russia as an aggressor. And to be honest, here in Poland, this is the biggest problem, the biggest question, that we are really afraid of a situation that Russia and Putin says is openly. That, let's say, eastern flank, Poland, Baltic Sea and other targets after Ukraine. So it's not only war between Russia and Ukraine, it is war between Russia and the Western countries. So this is the biggest problem. And when you say about migrants, we have so many Ukrainians here because we accepted them, we open our arms, offer them shelters. So, you know, this is the biggest problem. Right now, okay, I agree that we should cooperate with Africa, but this is the biggest threat, the biggest challenge, the most important thing, that we have a war. It's not like a hybrid war, because to be honest, before the invasion, we thought that it could be kind of a hybrid war. You know, there was no any expectations that will be, let's say, classic, old-fashioned war, but we face it. There are people who are killing by Russians. So this is the most important issue, and we have a problem how to cooperate with other countries, how to convince them that it is our biggest threat, and how to cooperate with them if they think that it's not important. And talking about war in Iraq, okay, it's, from my understanding, it is whataboutism to some extent.
Well, again, for your first part of your question about getting information in China, and the second part about whataboutism, I guess is what you call it. It's an interesting phrase. Now, getting information in China is difficult. I agree with you. But unfortunately, China is a reality. 1.4 billion people are not going to go away. And China will become the world's largest economy. So we have the unfortunate responsibility of trying to understand our biggest neighbor, right? And but in one way or another, we Asians find that by traveling to China, I go there 3-4 times a year. I meet people, have reasonably candid conversations, sometimes about what is their problems and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, most Asian countries find China a predictable partner. That if you make a deal with China, the deal sticks and it's done. And also, the world's largest free trade agreement was launched in January 2022. It includes, ASEAN countries proposed it, 10 ASEAN countries. It includes China, and includes 4 allies of the United States: Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. So you can see that in Asia, we take a very pragmatic view of these things. If it works, we do it. And we will work with China, we will work with India, we will work with any country. We also work very closely with the United States, by the way. And in fact, the United States has invested more in ASEAN than it has in China, Japan, South Korea, India combined. So we have close ties with both. So that's our approach, is to be very pragmatic, focus on our interests, and then we carry on. Now, when you ask about the position, why doesn't the rest of the world take as strong a position on Ukraine as Europe does? I think the Indian foreign minister replied to your question. Do you remember what he said? He said, I'm quoting the Indian foreign minister. He said, the problem with Europe is that Europeans think that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. So he said, for example, why did you all run away from Afghanistan? You spent so many years there. The West just abandoned Afghanistan, and then the region has got to pick up the pieces. He says, why isn't Afghanistan important? So I think it's important for Europeans to show some degree of sensitivity to the interests and needs of other people, including the interests and needs of people who are much poorer than Europeans. And I would say exhibit A is the Africans, right? Now, as you know, in Asia, 3 countries have imposed sanctions on Russia: Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. 3 countries. But the rest of Asians, no sanctions on Russia. Among Africans, no African has imposed sanctions on Russia. Among South Americans, no country in South America has imposed sanctions on Russia. So I think you should ask yourself, why are they not doing so? And the simple answer is that they have their own needs and concerns and interests. They have their own problems, their own challenges they have to deal with, right? So I think you should show some sensitivity, because Europe, at the end of the day, makes up less than 5% of the world's population. There are 95% out there. The remaining 95% have their own concerns and interests, which are very real also. And in the case of India, as you know, India's main priority now is to focus on growth and development to eliminate poverty in India. And one way they're doing it, when the prices of oil went up As you know, India went from buying 1% of Russian oil to buying 20% of Russian oil because they had to keep their economy growing. And what's shocking is that India is now exporting some of its Russian oil to Europe, and Europe is buying it. And these are examples of the pragmatic decisions that are made. So I think it is very, when you talk to the rest of the world, don't give them a black and white view of the world, because the world is very complex and very nuanced. And if you can engage the world and understand these complexities and these nuances, then you will understand this. And you know, as you know, even in the case of Poland also, I don't know whether I should mention this. The latest development came as a big shock to me, right? I mean, it was, when I read that, I said, cannot be. Didn't Poland say that they will stop supplying weapons to Ukraine? Yeah, but that's what came out in the media. But it's also true that you've had a big fight with Ukraine. No, but the whole world read it. You know, it's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I will open the floor to you, but I have one additional question to Professor, because you said that, so my question is, because you said about the African countries, Asian countries, that they have own interests, India has an own interest, that of course we are focusing on our problems in Europe, and we should not think that the whole world will be focusing on our problems. But so I have a question about something which is called the food security. Because there is, as Ukraine as a producer of grain, and now, of course, there is a debate here in Europe, but don't you think that we should explain to the, let's say, other countries that, for example, the problems with the food that they are facing with the supply after this invasion is because of Russia? Because I have some understanding that what the countries, not non-European countries, think, that they do not see that Russia is an aggressor, and what is happening after the aggression, which is detrimental for those countries, is because of Russia, not because of Ukraine or Europe as Europe. So, you know, this is a kind of a logical problem for me, that many countries, they have pretty good relations with Russia. They have its own interest, but at the end of the day, the problems they have, for example, with some food deliveries, is because of Russia. You know, so this is the problem for me: how to convince them, and how to explain it. So, because after this discussion and what you said about the perception in Asia, in Africa, so it means that international does not matter. We can break the law, if you like, and we say, okay, we have our own interest. UN Charter does not matter. You know, this is for me, there's a problem, because for me still, okay, I'm European, I'm in Poland, I'm in a country that shares border with Ukraine. That is still black and white situation, especially when it comes to the aggression. It's not like, you know, you like the country or not, or you do not like, but it's, you know, so this, and the one additional, and I open the floor, I promise. You said that for Asian countries, China is a predictable partner. So what about some kind of, let's say, China's, activities in the South China Sea, for example, the militarization, the land reclamation, the kind of, I know it's not an ASEAN country, but what about this coercion against Australia? What about the, let's say, China's activities around the Taiwan? You know, what about this kind of activities that China is doing, which are not, let's say, which are security related, to be honest, and China is, because to be honest, in Europe, for example, in Central Europe, very important moment was that we started to rethink our perception of China to some, for example, a coercion against Lithuania. China's coercions against Lithuania is a kind of a new mode of coercion because China has decided to weaponize the supply chains. So I'd like to ask you about this question. And then I will open the floor to our audience.
Each of the issues you raise may take half an hour to answer. I'll give very brief answers. And there are problems, by the way. I mean, South China Sea, you're right. There are problems. There are differing claims between China and ASEAN countries. But, if you read my book, Has China Won? In the chapter on South China Sea, I begin by describing what one of the most distinguished American ambassadors to China told me. His name is Ambassador Stapleton Roy. He understands China very, very well. He grew up in China as a young boy, as a father of missionary parents in China. So his understanding of China is among the best in the world. And at a lunch that I had with him, and he allowed me to quote him in the book, he said that, Kishore, when Xi Jinping proposed the demilitarization of the South China Sea to President Obama, he said Obama should have seized that offer from President Xi, say, okay, let's agree. Let's demilitarize the South China Sea. And he said, instead, this is Ambassador Stapleton Roy, American ambassador saying this. Instead, he said, we foolishly rebuffed him and we stepped up our naval presence in the South China Sea. And this is an American ambassador saying that America made a mistake in rebuffing an offer from China. That is something you will never read in Anglo-Saxon media. So, and I have his permission. You can go and double check with him if you want what he said. And in the case of reclamation of islands, it's important to at least state as a fact that the first country to reclaim land in the South China Sea was not China. Unfortunately, the ASEAN countries decided to do so. But the problem is that when the ASEAN countries claim 20 acres, the Chinese claim 2,000 acres. They're so big. You cannot compete with China, right? But if you ask me, will there be war between China and ASEAN countries in the South China Sea? Again, I make this prediction, there'll be no war. Come and see me in 5 years and let me know whether I was right or wrong. And why won't there be war? Because there are differences, there are challenges, but we keep on talking to each other. And we keep on emphasizing we've got to find solutions that work for both of us. And the reality is this. This is an unfortunate geopolitical reality that has been around for 2,000 years. When great powers emerge, you can't stop them. Don't expect the great power to adjust to you. You figure out, how do I deal with that great power? Because it's an asymmetry of power. And just as, when the United States emerged in the late 19th century, it conquered territories in Central America. It conquered Philippines from Spain in 1895, I think. And guess what? You adjust to new power. These are realities. And as a student of geopolitics for 50 years, I know that if you don't understand geopolitical realities will come and slap you in the face if you come from a small state like Singapore. So our position is that we will adjust depending on how the great powers are doing. And we do our best. But at the same time, so far, I can tell you that East Asia is thriving. It's amazing. The growth is absolutely phenomenal. And it was going to be even more massive growth. So for us, frankly, the world looks like a very happy place. I know it's very hard to say this here in Europe, but for us, in terms of the last 20 years have been wonderful years, the next 30 years are going to be even better years, so why should we complain?
这场极其精彩的思想交锋，我们就看到这里。这位波兰学者可以说把欧洲主流精英那种天真和自以为是表现得淋漓尽致，他全程都在强调道德、原则以及对抗侵略者的必要性。而马凯硕教授 则用一种四两拨千斤的方式，轻松地把这种世界观拆解掉了。第一，他用欧盟当年制裁过入侵伊拉克的美国吗？这个简单直接的反问，彻底戳穿了欧洲所谓道德立场的双重标准。第二，他引用印度外长的名言，欧洲的问题是世界的问题，但世界的问题不是欧洲的问题，精准地撕下了欧洲视角背后那种根深蒂固的自我中心。而且你看，整场对话里，这位波兰学者反复拿中国说事，字里行间都透露着一股傲慢和偏见。这其实也反映了一个很可悲的现实，中国其实一直希望看到一个独立自主的欧洲，也愿意和欧洲合作，但欧洲这帮政客就像完全没有脑子一样，宁可牺牲自己的利益，也要死心塌地的跟着美国跑。所以我觉得这场对话看下来，感受特别深。马凯硕代表的这种务实的现实主义，确实是在这个残酷世界里一种更高级的生存智慧。而欧洲那套所谓的价值观外交，说白了，真的就只剩下一个美国跟屁虫的角色，当一块遮羞布了。欢迎在评论区聊聊你的看法。今天的分享就到这里，感谢大家收看，我们下次见。